The briefing is brought to you in association with Spain. From the wilds of the Atlantic to the warmth of Mediterranean isles, the Spanish coast has something for every occasion. And whether chartering a yacht or renting a more modest motorboat, there's no better way to explore this magical country's lesser-known highlights than from the open water. Listen out for a new summer season of The Concierge on Monocle Radio. Join Robert Bound and friends as they turn navigator for an unforgettable journey along the Spanish coast. From hidden gems to legendary gastronomy, and with the unique drama of the America's Cup in the host city of Barcelona added to the mix, discover why the time is right to take to the waves. The Concierge, returning to Monocle Radio in July. This summer, set sail for Spain.
You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 23rd of July 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program.
I was the elected Attorney General, as I've mentioned, of California, and before that I was a courtroom prosecutor. In those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. I know Donald Trump's type.
Kamala Harris steps out of the shadows with her first public appearances as the now presumptive Democratic candidate for U.S. president. We'll look at what her record as vice president says about her ability to govern. From there we head to Taiwan, where the start of typhoon season has curtailed the first military exercises under its new president. After that...
Hi, I'm Tonje Iversen, and I'll be bringing you the latest headlines from the Nordics, including the recent travel trend dubbed coolcation.
Thank you, Tonje. And finally, we'll ask whether you could have what it takes to be the creative director of a fashion house, because lots of them currently have vacancies. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Yesterday in the United States marked the first full day of a new electoral reality, with Kamala Harris taking the lead at two events, one at the White House and one in Delaware, consolidating her position as the Democratic Party's candidate for the November presidential election. Today, she'll be officially campaigning for the first time in the swing state of Wisconsin. All of this comes as she appears to have passed the mark of delegates needed to officially win her party's nomination at a convention planned for next month. Well, I'm joined now by Natasha Lindstedt, Professor of Government at the University of Essex, and by Dr. Christopher Sabatini, Senior Fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Natasha, before we get started, I did just want to play a little more of Kamala Harris. We heard one clip at the top, but this is another clip of her appearing with Joe Biden's campaign staffers in Delaware.
We love Joe and Jill. We really do. They truly are like family to us. And we do. Everybody here does.
It's neutral.
I knew you were still there. You're not going anywhere, Joe.
I'm watching you, kid. I'm watching you, kid. I love you.
I love you, Joe. Oh.
Natasha, listening to that clip, I mean, the speed at which Democrats have coalesced around Kamala Harris and sort of after Joe Biden's announcement over the weekend has been pretty remarkable, hasn't it? I mean, what have we made of these first public appearances?
It has been remarkable because if we were just to look a week ago, it looked like the Democrats were completely fractured, in total disarray. There wasn't certainty what Biden was going to do and whether or not there was someone that Democrats could get behind. And the most obvious name would have been Kamala Harris, of course, because she's the vice president. But there were other names thrown about. But no one really, at least as of yet, has thrown their hat into the ring and said that they're going to run against her. The likely candidates would have been maybe Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. You're hearing that name, or Gretchen Whitmer, governor of, both these are governor of Michigan. But thus far, or Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. But we haven't heard that anyone's going to compete against her. And instead, actually, people have been endorsing her. You've had big endorsements from major Democrats, whether it be the Clintons and more recently Nancy Pelosi, who had been holding back. putting out her endorsement. So she's quickly taken over the campaign funds, the networks, the structure, and also the campaign staffers. And, she's already making key statements and trying to make her case to the American public.
And Natasha, just to follow that up, I mean, when you say making her case to the American public, when you listen to those kinds of campaign appearances that she had yesterday, I mean, to what extent does she have to go about almost reintroducing herself to the public at this point?
I think she does need to reintroduce herself because she hasn't been that visible to the American public in the last 3.5 years. And that actually surprised me. I thought that she would be much more active and proactive vice president, but she has only been in the news for things that might not be that positive for her, whether being erroneously called by the Trump team the immigration czar. So we haven't heard as much from her, and she's one of these people that, at least in the Senate in her career and as an attorney general in California, that she's been fighting for reproductive rights and for giving more Americans access to healthcare, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, or fighting for more gun control. But we haven't seen that much of her on these types of topics. And those are issues that sort of are in her wheelhouse because of her experience as a prosecutor, as someone who upholds the rule of law, who, prosecutes people who break the law. And we're already seeing these kind of stark contrasts that she's highlighting between her and Trump, who's a convicted felon.
Well, Chris, to bring you in on this point that Natasha mentioned there as well, I mean, part of the concern about Harris ahead of this week was that she had struggled to make her mark as vice president, and particularly on the topic of immigration, where she was also trying to deal with Central American leaders. What have you made of her record on that?
Well, first of all, I want to say I think this was a little more pre-cooked than most people realize. The Democratic Party looked divided, kind of engaging in its own internecine battles. But the truth is they were holding their fire until after the Republican National Convention. So they both managed to basically not set up Kamala Harris as a target in the Republican National Convention. They were still firing away at Joe Biden. And then a day or 2 days after the convention ends, they announce Kamala Harris, and so they steal the bounce that any party usually gets from a convention. And of course, the Democrats rallied, and we see the record-setting $50 million raised in 24 hours by Kamala Harris. So there's a little more strategy here than it just looking like a rudderless Democratic Party. But to your point about the Central America immigration, yeah, honestly they handed her a poison chalice. It was a difficult task. And she didn't handle it all that well. She fumbled on a few interviews. The one with Lester Holt, about the border, she didn't quite hit it. And I don't think she got the backing from the White House either. But no one really wanted to deal with it. It was, Joe Biden was trying to pass a series of laws, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, transportation investment, that, it really wasn't a priority, although it was very deeply partisan. It was sort of a no-win situation. I think she never quite recovered from that. But also, the truth is, a lot of her, where she can sort of really shine is on prosecution, rule of law issues, as Natasha was saying. But of course, those aren't the issues that were sort of front and center in the last 3.5 years. Where she's really come out swinging, and I think it's been very important, and it does figure into her strategy for the election, is on women's rights. After the Supreme Court's decision to basically ban the constitutional right to abortion and turn it back to the National Congress and to the states to make decisions. And she has come out swinging on that. And I think that's very important because even Donald Trump recognizes that women's reproductive rights and women's rights generally are a huge issue for independent voters, suburban women, suburban men as well, that it is really if the soft underbelly of right now the Trump administration, the Republican Party's platform, and I think she's going to hammer away on that, as Natasha said too, also on the 34 felonies that Donald Trump has. So she's well positioned, I think, to come out of the gate swinging. She already has started that. We'll see where it goes, and I think the question will be now. It is pretty much her nomination. She's already locked in the delegates that she needs. No one has come forward, as Natasha said. The question will be who she selects as the vice presidential candidate. But it's, be honest, all this doomsday saying about, well, it'll be a divisive lead up to the convention and all this jockeying for power and whatever. Clearly, the campaign has started and she's the front runner and she's going to be the candidate. And now the race really starts.
Natasha, as Chris mentioned there, I mean, immigration was a very difficult issue to begin with, but Harris did kind of find her voice, arguably, after the Supreme Court's decision on Roe v. Wade that Chris was mentioning there. Do you expect that to be, I guess, the key topic going forward in this election as well? Or at least is Kamala Harris going to make that the key topic, even if, say, Republicans would rather talk about something like immigration?
I think that is going to be the key topic for her. She's really effective in talking about this topic and is more effective than Biden has been. And for that reason, and it could be for other reasons, she's tended to resonate better than Biden has with female voters, with also minority voters and younger voters. I think the issue will also be about democracy and the huge threat that Trump poses to democracy. But that isn't enough really to, I guess, mobilize some of these undecided voters or those that are more moderate. The ones that are already going to vote for either a Harris or a Biden ticket, we're already convinced that Trump poses a huge threat to democracy. So she's going to have to capitalize on that issue of fighting for reproductive rights, because that really led to a huge turnout in the midterm elections in 2022 in favor of the Democrats.
And just to follow that up, Natasha, I mean, polls still do put Donald Trump ahead, or at least they had in the last week. I mean, do you expect that is something that will change as Harris goes about introducing herself to the public? Or is it a sign of just, how much passion there is for Donald Trump as well, frankly, regardless of the Democratic ticket?
So I don't think we can completely take seriously these polls from before, because now it's a completely different situation with Harris being the potential nominee. Some of the polls that were showing beforehand showed her doing a little bit better than Biden, but still behind Trump. Now this is a very different scenario, and she may be able to get a bump, as there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm behind her candidacy. As Chris already mentioned, there's just, in the last 24 hours, record sums from 888,000 contributors. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 100 days if Trump will allow himself to debate her. I think that he wouldn't do well. I don't think he actually is going to debate her, but that can change things. But I think that the race has really transformed, where there was a lot of just lack of enthusiasm for either candidate, for either Trump or for Biden. And I think this has kind of energized the Democratic base. But you also see on Trump's side, his approval rating and support just hasn't moved that much. It's like around 46%. It doesn't seem, no matter what he does, it doesn't change much. And so there really is an opportunity here for Harris and her campaign, assuming she's the nominee, of gathering those people that are just kind of undecided, not sure what to do yet, and maybe liked Biden's policies but didn't think Biden was, I guess, that they thought he was just too old to run.
Thank you very much. That was Natasha Lindstedt and Dr. Christopher Sabatini. Now here's Monocle's Carlotta Ribello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. The billionaire founder of the South Korean tech giant Kakao has been arrested on suspicion of manipulating stock prices during the acquisition of the K-pop agency SM Entertainment last year. Kim Byung-soo has denied the accusations, saying he never ordered or condoned any illegal acts. Kakao is valued at more than $12 billion and runs South Korea's most popular chat app. The leaders of the rival Palestinian groups Fatah and Hamas have signed a deal to end years of division. Following talks in Beijing, hosted by China's foreign minister, 14 Palestinian factions have agreed to set up an interim national reconciliation government after the war in Gaza ends. It's the latest move to revive efforts to form a government for the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And Ukraine's foreign minister will head to China today for 2 days of talks in a bid to persuade Beijing to reduce its support for Russia. Dmytro Kuleba's trip aims to persuade Beijing to get behind Kyiv's push for sustainable peace. Beijing denies that it supports Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but China has not condemned the war and refused to join Ukrainian-led international peace conferences. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Taiwan is gearing up for its first major typhoon of the season, among other things prompting the island to cut its air force out of annual war games taking place this week, limiting the first defense exercises since Taiwan's presidential elections to land and sea. The storm is expected to make landfall tomorrow or Thursday morning. And I'm joined for more on this now by William Yang, journalist based in Taipei. William, how are the preparations for the typhoon going?
So the government has already set up a command center at the central government, but at the same time, each local government, especially the counties on the East Coast, have already started and implemented their plans to deal with this big typhoon that is going to arrive in Taiwan sometime tomorrow.
And how significant is the fact that these war games as well were curtailed as a result of this, at least the Air Force's participation in them? I mean, this was meant to be quite a demonstration, I suppose, a show of force also, for that matter, for China under Taiwan's new president.
Right. So even though the military claim and said that the cancellation of the Air Force aspect of the military drills are not going to significantly reduce the importance of this military drill, but at the same time, some of the measures that are supposed to be practiced and exercised, stimulated during the drills, including repairing the runways and ensuring that they are able to move the fighter jets to other areas that will be able to avoid the bombardment from the invading troops, cannot really be simulated this time. So I think because these drills are new to the overall military exercises in Taiwan, so that puts a question to when the government will then be able to implement these in military exercise.
And, I mean, as you mentioned, this aspect of the drills are new. Put that into a bit more context for us. Why is this aspect of the drill so necessary? Why was this added this year? What does that say about the kind of tense situation currently with the mainland China?
So basically, these drills became a part of the military exercise since last year when China started flying their fighter jets to the East Coast, which traditionally is where Taiwan used to preserve its military power in the past. And as China started to experiment the landing and the taking off of their fighter jets from the aircraft carrier on the East Coast of Taiwan, the Taiwanese Air Force and the military are forced to respond and come up with a course of measures that they can actually use to make sure that the military and the Air Force is not going to be damaged or handicapped by the Chinese military's new capabilities from projecting their powers from the East Coast.
And in terms of the typhoon in general, just tell us a little bit more, not just about the preparations, but I suppose how the public is taking this. This is obviously something that Taiwan has to deal with every year. Is there anything different about this year?
I think because Taiwan has not really had a major typhoon that is going to cover most of the island over the last few years due to climate change. So this is one of the first I think since 2021 that Taiwan has to be more prepared than the last few years. And so we are already seeing people heading to grocery shopping for the necessities that they're likely going to need. And at the same time, local governments are preparing for potential flooding in the southwest, which traditionally are parts of Taiwan that are often being slammed by this kind of disaster. So I think these preparations are kind of just renewing and reminding Taiwanese people of the drills or the preparations that they used to do. But at the same time, it's coming at a time that coincided with the annual military exercise.
And finally, just is there a need for international support on this? Is Taiwan saying anything about that? I mean, we typically focus on support when it comes to the military, particularly from the United States, but that's not necessarily the only type of support that Taiwan needs.
So I think when it comes to typhoon, Taiwan generally is pretty well prepared on itself. On the other hand, the other type of natural disaster that we have recently seen the need for huge international support was the earthquakes. And so I think the Taiwanese government is pretty confident that they have the necessary responses that can cope with this incoming typhoon.
William Yang, thank you very much for joining us. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm Chris Chermak. Time now for a roundup of news from the Nordics. I am joined now by Tonje Iversen, UK correspondent for Norwegian broadcasters TV2 and P4. Tonje, great to have you on the show. Let's start with news out of Finland, which is, I suppose, seeing the fruits of its new NATO membership with an American bomber flyover.
Yeah, a pair of B-52 strategic bombers that came in over Finland from Norwegian airspace made a first ever flight in the skies above Lapland Sunday morning. And this has never happened before and shows the fundamental change in geopolitics following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Finland, of course, joined NATO in April last year as a result of the war. And Finland then said that there would be no geographical restrictions on where NATO partners could cooperate within the country's territory. And according to a Defence Force press release, the bomber's flight was a training mission heading south from Norway over Finnish Lapland. And Finland's defense minister commented on social media about the flights. And according to him, this was a normal operation on the territory of a NATO member state, and that the flights were a demonstration of deterrence and defense, and that the United States is an important ally of Finland and considers the visibility of concrete action important.
I mean, Tonje, how significant is it for you, and also for when you look at the coverage of this, the fact that now you can have these kinds of exercises across the Nordics? That is something that you were not able to have before, as there was this sort of division of some some countries part of NATO and others weren't.
Yeah, so Sweden and Finland, of course, are quite recent members of NATO, while Norway has been a long-standing member of NATO. So you have had a lot of missions, a lot of training missions in especially the north of Norway. And of course, Norway has said that they are looking forward to cooperate more, especially with Sweden and Finland.
Well, let's move on to one other story, a couple of other stories he brought us. But first, the anti-whaling campaigner Paul Watson has been arrested in Greenland and is facing extradition to Japan. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so the police in Greenland said that they apprehended the environmental activist and anti-whaling campaigner Paul Watson on an international arrest warrant issued by Japan. And he was arrested Sunday when his ship docked in Greenland's capital, Nuuk. His organization described more than a dozen police officers boarding the vessel and leading Watson away in handcuffs. They explained that the ship had 25 volunteer crew members on it and was en route to the North Pacific on a mission to intercept a new Japanese whaling ship. So on Monday, Paul Watson's foundation said that the Watsons would be detained in Nuuk at least until the 15th of August following the court's decision to give the Danish Justice Ministry time to investigate the case and a possible extradition to Japan. And according to his foundation, he faces a maximum sentence of 15 years in prison in Japan. We also hear that the Greenland court won't allow Watson's release on bail as he is considered a flight risk.
And how is this being treated by the public, the governments, I wonder, in Denmark and elsewhere in the region? I mean, is there support for this? Is there a strong kind of anti-whaling sentiment or pro-whaling sentiment? How does this kind of, spread out among the public?
It is a controversial issue, and it has been for a very long time. And Norway is, of course, one of few countries that allow whaling. So in Norway, it is not unusual to find whale meat on the menu at a sushi restaurant or at larger supermarkets. Some people consider it a sustainable delicacy, while others see it as an outdated and cruel praxis. So, but according to an opinion poll amongst Norwegian, more than 60% are skeptical to whaling, and especially the hunting practice. So those that advocate for whaling often defend it by saying that whaling maintain the ecosystem, but they are meeting a lot of resistance here, especially from animal welfare organizations who say that this is a outdated practice that should be abolished.
Well, finally, Tonja, a story from Forbes. Scandinavia is struggling to cope with a new tourism trend called coolcation.
Yeah, so this is a funny one because usually it's Norwegians or people from the Nordic who travel to the south of Europe to enjoy the sun, to enjoy beaches. Now we're saying that there's a lot more tourists who are trying to actually escape the heat waves, escape the sun in the south of Europe, and they come to countries such as Norway and Visit Norway. They are a tourist organization who have launched a campaign where they are trying to tempt the tourists to come and enjoy 12 to 23 degrees Celsius, and they have pictures of rain and a cooler weather. So a break from the heat is the message, and it is quite popular amongst some tourists. They say that it's too uncomfortable to be outside in the summer in their home countries, and that they have chosen to go to the Nordic countries. But of course, Norway and other, especially rural places in Scandinavia, are not used to a huge pressure of tourists. So they are finding it a bit hard to adapt.
This is always the question, isn't it, when it comes to tourism? I mean, do you get the sense that Norwegians then want to keep this nice, cool weather to themselves?
To a certain degree, there's a lot of complaints about littering, about it's being too long queues to reach a ferry, people waiting hours to get a ferry, a lot of motorhomes. People in Norway also loves to go on vacation in their motorhomes, and that you don't have enough parking, you don't have enough infrastructure, and also places where you don't have any G5 or G4 mobile coverage, where people really are struggling. And some people worry about the pressure, but some people also worry about that tourists would feel like they had enough of Norway. Like, why come to Norway when they have to stand in queue for hours, cannot find a decent place to park, and cannot even go on their own phone?
Maybe a bit of an infrastructure upgrade wouldn't hurt. Thank you very much. That was Tonja Iversen. This is The Briefing. And finally, on today's show, if you ever wanted to try your luck as a creative director in the world of fashion, well, then now would be a good time to throw your CV into the pile. Tom Ford is, as of this week, looking for a new creative director after the exit of Peter Hawkings, joining the likes of Chanel and Givenchy searching for creative replacements. I'm joined now from Paris by Dana Thomas, Paris-based author of Fashionopolis, The Price of Fast Fashion and the Future of Clothes. Dana, what did Tom Ford say, first of all, or at least from sources? It sounds like Peter Hawkings was fired.
I think Peter Hawkings was fired. And it was apparently quite brusque and, sort of American style. You're out, don't come back after lunch. And it was really heartbreaking because he's worked for Tom Ford, the person, at Gucci and then later at the brand for 26 years. And Tom Ford, the designer, when he sold his company to Estee Lauder last year and handpicked Hawkings to take over. But it just didn't seem to gel. Even, Hawkings had been a fabulous number two, and this is often the case in many businesses, a fabulous number two who just didn't quite make it as number one. That Tom Ford himself, the person, the designer, was such an powerful presence, and I've known Tom for 30 years. He's such a powerful presence that you to be his deputy, you have to, give way to him. And when he was no longer there, Hawkings just didn't have the right stuff to step into Tom's shoes, is what it comes down to.
Well, what does that say about, in general, I guess, the challenge of being a creative designer, as you kind of mentioned there? I mean, how hard is it for designers to be on the same page with the fashion houses and the founders that they are representing, that they are trying to design for?
It's very hard. And it's a bit of a problem now with all these young talents who are coming up, because they've all worked their way up in houses and been number 2s or number 3s, assistants and sub-junior assistants, and really had to, work for the star designers. And we keep being told that the age of the star designer is over, but in the end, it really isn't. The problem is we haven't made any new stars. Star designers in the old days, they didn't work their way up. I mean, Tom somewhat did, but they kind of just arrived and started their own companies. McQueen started his own company. Galliano started his own company. These guys got out of school and just went for it. They didn't go work for somebody else for 30 years and then decide to step into the shoes. So they don't have that same charisma. They've been being yes people for so long that they can't be the ones dictating.
Is that, then in your mind, the reason for all of these vacancies at the moment? I mean, what does that mean for these fashion houses? Do they kind of need to change their approach when it comes to advertising for a new fashion designer?
Well, in fact, the problem is that they're just not patient enough anymore. That, fashion is a very weird business where you show in September, but the clothes don't get to the stores until March, and then you don't get your sales figures for another 9 months. So it's almost a year and a half from the time you show the clothes until you get the results. And if other things can come up, SARS or COVID or war, or that can impact those sales. So, you never know you have to be really patient to see how it's going to play out. Trying to figure out if somebody's good or not with 2 collections. I mean, the first collection just got in the stores in May from last September. We don't know how it's selling yet. So I think they just aren't the number crunchers in the C-suite just don't have the patience that you need anymore to run fashion. And that's why all these houses are having so much turnover in the top spot. I mean, Chanel, okay. Carl died and his number 2 did not measure up, just like this situation. And she was about to be let go and then turned around and said, you know what, I'm leaving instead. And, it goes on like that with all these big places. And McQueen, the new guy's not measuring up. And it's they'll probably sack him after 2 years. And who knows you can't see the results in 2 years. There's no patience anymore.
So that's the negative, but I guess just to flip it the other way for one moment, I do wonder, what are the fashion houses then looking for? I mean, give us their best pitch for any budding designers out there.
I don't know, besides, fame, stardom, and money.
That's an easy one.
I mean, in the end, why would you want to take over Chanel? Fame, stardom, and money, right? And legacy and creating. I mean, I don't think they have a lot of creative freedom anymore, because it's also run by teams, and now AI is getting into the mix and telling them, well, actually, we really need this in red because our algorithms and our AI tells us that's going to sell better in red than it does in blue. So I think that it's not much left. There's not a lot left of creative in the creative director's job. It's more about directing.
And just finally, Dana, before we let you go, the Olympics are just around the corner. So I do have to ask you, based on the fact that you're in Paris, what are you expecting from that? Are you excited? And what are you expecting from the fashion houses over there?
Oh, well, from the fashion houses, we're calling it in Paris, we're calling it the LVMH Games, because they spent 150 million euros to be a premium sponsor. And everywhere you turn, it's going to be LVMH. They're selling Moet and Chandon champagne at the kiosks. The French team is going to be dressed by Berluti in some pretty, not very nice looking suits, but whatever. And the medals are going to be presented on Louis Vuitton trays, and the medals themselves are being made by Chaumet. I mean, it's the LVMH games. So that's what we're going to see there. But I'm going to go see fencing in the Grand Palais, and I'm very excited to see the Grand Palais, which has been restored and renovated to a pristine state for the first time in 125 years, and underwritten by the House of Chanel.
Dana, Thomas, we will look out for you in the fencing crowd at the Olympics. That is all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Laura Kramer. Our researcher was Gunnar Grunlund, and our studio manager was Christy O'Grady. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.